Welcome to the Simply Jenna podcast. This is Breaking the Stigma, a special mini-series. Join us as we interview different people and talk about their journey to wellness. If you have thought about getting support but were afraid, or are afraid of what others might think, this series is for you. Stay tuned for some really good stories. Welcome to the Simply Jenna podcast.
We are so excited for this one.
This is a big one. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Nikki.
Here we are on video.
For the first time ever.
Real life.
A little nerve-wracking.
Totally. So this episode is big. This is another episode of Breaking the Stigma.
Mm-hmm. We had a fantastic guest that we were so thrilled to have. So honored that he would join us.
Yes. So to build up who he is, he's a former NHL player,
current Hockey Night in Canada broadcaster,
played for the Islanders, the Kings, and the Sharks.
And his career spanned 15 years as a goalie.
Yes. And he lives here in Calgary. So we were very fortunate to have Hrudey join us on this podcast. So
amazing.
Yeah, quite a dream for us. And we are just so grateful that he was able to give us a little bit of his time to share his story and to also help us work in continuing to break the stigma in mental health. So we're excited for you to hear it.
You ready to go? You ready to roll?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so to kick us off, so we wanted to get you to share a fun fact with us, maybe something that your fans wouldn't know about you, or anything interesting that maybe you haven't shared in your book or in other interviews.
I may have shared it in the book, but what most people don't know about me is that I never ever thought that I'd have a career in sports, and certainly never a career in broadcasting. My goal in life was I wanted to be a park warden in Banff or Jasper or Yoho or Kootenay, something like that. And I'll tell you the background to that.
Yeah.
Right? So when I grew up in Edmonton, we didn't have much money. My mom and dad were lovely, lovely people. But the only holiday we could afford, we had a tiny little camper. I have an older brother, and the four of us would go to the mountain parks for our summer holidays. And so that would be a week or whatever it would be. And my mom and dad gave my brother and I a love for the mountains. And so that's something that I'm happy to say I've passed on to my three daughters. He's passed it on to his three sons. And so it's a gift that my mom and dad didn't know they were giving us, but it's one of the greatest gifts they've given me. And I will say this, I don't know when my time will come. I hope I have quite a few more years here, but my last holiday, I hope to take to the Rocky Mountains, because that's how special it is for me.
Oh, that's nice. Fantastic.
That's so wonderful.
Awesome.
And how interesting that he wanted to be a park
I know,
ranger,
right?
Never would have
and
thought.
look at where your life turned out.
Yeah.
Right, the stupid game of hockey got in my way.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
Yeah. It was so interesting to read in your book that you had only started playing hockey when you were 12.
Yeah.
So
I had played like a little bit, I played ball hockey and street hockey with all my buddies in the neighborhood. And my mom and dad did have a skating rink in our backyard for a few winters. I'm not sure. I can't remember. I was still really young. I'm going to say I might have been around 4, something like that. And, but I never really had much of an interest in joining an organized team, because I was getting my fill. I was playing ball hockey and I was, I was having a good time. But what I really recognized when I was about 11 is that I was missing all my buddies because they were playing organized hockey.
Yeah.
And so I thought, you know what? I want to be around my buddies more often. So I asked my mom and dad when I was 11 if I could join a team. And they gave me great advice. Both of them said, no, you have to learn how to skate for a year. And so I did. In my community outdoor rink, I'd go after school. Of course, I did my homework. Well,
of course.
maybe I was a little negligent in that area, but anyways, and then I sort of learned how to skate. And then the following year I joined a team, and it was just magical. And playing goal was it's so unique, right? It's so difficult, and every day is different. Every day is a new challenge. And I've always said about playing that position, it's totally intoxicating because every day's new. There's challenges, there's rewards. I think personally that very few positions or players on a team have the ability to directly affect the outcome negatively and positively. And that's really a really cool feeling. It's stressful at times, but it is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was incredible reading in your book about how you thought through each process and how you looked at each player differently and learned their little strategies and techniques and how you had to keep track of that. It's just absolutely fascinating. It really,
Yeah, you have a whole full book on every player and what they like to do. And then if you're a little bit unsure, I would usually ask my goalie partner, like, what do you know about this guy? And what does he like to do in this situation? If I wasn't quite clear, or if I just needed to reaffirm something that I had thought. And so I was like, and by the way, I was a guy that really loved to watch a lot of hockey, even when I was in the NHL. And there's no right or wrong answer. Some guys don't. Like Wayne Gretzky also, he watched a ton. In fact, he still does. And I remember a guy, Nick Lidstrom, one of the all-time greatest, right? And I asked him one time, we used to have a Sirius satellite radio show, and I asked him on the show if he'd like to watch hockey. He goes, no, I get enough just from playing. So, but for me, it was a way of doing my homework too. So I'd watch tons of games, and then I'd get an idea what players like to do and so on. So that was, very, very important for me to watch.
unbelievable.
And by the way, just before, in the book, I think I shared about a game had to be manageable for me, right? It's too overwhelming to think you have to try and be perfect for 60 minutes or depending what overtime might go in a playoff game. So I used to break a period down in 5-minute segments always, so that it was manageable. I always thought it's kind of like tricking your brain to think, I can be perfect for 5 minutes, right? And then if you're not, if they score, you wipe the slate clean, you have one thought. Just one simple thought after, make the next save. That's it. You don't worry big picture. You don't worry about giving up 3 or 4 more in a row. You worry about one thing, that's making the next save and going the next 5 minutes without giving up a goal.
That's unbelievable. It's such a good psychological trick.
Really
I
simple.
think, to really like manage the stress that comes with being in that position. It's beautiful.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of the things that stood out to me in your book, which maybe, I don't know how much you've talked about it, but is the handshake.
Oh, I upset a lot of people, especially in today's world, because, and maybe I will change my mind. I don't know if I will, but we're such a safe world we live in now, which is a great thing. But I absolutely despised the handshake, and I saw no reason to partake. I did every time. But I can tell you, I never said anything nice to the guy that beat me, and nobody ever said anything nice to me. So it's a different world. There's no question the world's changing, and I have to adapt. But now you see guys hugging and all that, and patting the chest and all that, and that just wasn't for me. But now I've been around it for so long that it doesn't upset me when I watch players do that in a playoff series anymore at the end. But it just seems strange to me. Here I'm trying to beat your brains out 2 minutes earlier, or you're trying to do the same to me, and now all of a sudden we're handshakes. I didn't get it.
I know. And I love that you said that you played in a state of hate, right? Because that really captures how competitive it is, right? Is that you enter a state of hate. I guess.
And I had to be that way. That's just my nature.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't perform if I didn't have that. I don't think it's for everybody. I know some guys can play without that state of mind, but I kind of liken myself to a guy like John McEnroe, the great tennis player, where he was in that state, right? And that's how I had to be. Now, having said that, immediately as soon as the game was over, like I was fine. I'm not, and I didn't carry that hate over to off the ice. Very few players that I didn't like over the course of my career when I got to know them off the ice. So that was a state of mind I needed to be in to remain extremely competitive. And I don't suggest it for young kids that are going to play hockey now, boys or girls. That was just me. That's how my brain functions.
Yeah. And when you're competing at that level, there's certain strategies that you need to be competing at that level. And that's one of the strategies that you used, right? So that makes a lot of sense for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to switch gears then a little bit and just get into more of a discussion about your mental health journey.
Sure.
So this podcast sort of mini series that we've developed has been around this idea of breaking the stigma about talking
Yep.
about mental health and getting mental health support. So we wanted to know from you sort of if you can give us a bird's eye view of what was happening for you right before you decided to take that step of getting support. What was happening in your life?
Okay, so this is I think it might be a long-winded answer because
Okay.
it's not simple, right?
Yep,
So
of course.
I I recognized recently, I'm going to say about 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, that back in 92, 93, when I was playing for the LA Kings, that I had a mental health crisis. I didn't recognize it at the time. I just thought something was going on. Back then, you didn't really talk much about mental health.
Right.
In those days, and certainly not in the sports world and male dominated. That was
Mhm.
something you kept to yourself. And so when I was going through that stretch, I was really, really fortunate that my coach, Barry Melrose, recognized that I needed some help. And it was not anything to do with technical on the ice. It was something to do with what was going on in my head. So I was very lucky that Barry introduced me to Tony Robbins. And if you're familiar with Tony, he's a phenomenal guy. So I got to work with Tony one-on-one for a number of different sessions, and it turned my life around, frankly. And I've always told Barry that I'm forever indebted. And it was a really cool thing that, he knew I needed some help, and so he got me the help that I needed. And we went on to the finals that year, and I played another 5 years. But leading up to it that summer, my brain was telling me a whole bunch of thoughts or telling me a whole bunch of things. Now, I will tell you this, when you deal sometimes with mental health issues, you're talking about rational and irrational thoughts, right?
Yeah.
To a certain degree, my thoughts were rational. They were just too loud, and they were making it too real, because I was having thoughts leading up to that training camp about, boy, I've been in the league. I think that was going to be my 10th year. I'm 31 years old, I think. The average career is about 3 years. And I was wondering, and my wife was expecting our third child. I put a lot of pressure on myself, wondering how much longer I can play at that level. Just all these thoughts about it was becoming too stressful, and I was putting too much pressure on myself. So I needed the tools to change those thoughts. Tony gave me those.
Right.
But then you move forward to 2000 and the summer of 2005, when our daughter Caitlin her life was unmanageable, and she was ultimately diagnosed with OCD and anxiety. And so from that point on, I think our whole family started to learn more about mental health and those irrational thoughts, the loop, all these sorts of things. And so we became certainly not professionals, but we understood as much as, I think just regular people can about what's going on to a certain degree. And so in the summer of 2019, I started to have some thoughts again, very similar to what I was having in the summer of 92 about, can you keep doing this, and all these sorts of things. And I, my wife and I, Donna, took a trip to Europe in September of that year to celebrate our 35th anniversary and, the start of the new season and stuff. And I just wasn't quite as excited about starting the regular season as I normally would as a broadcaster. And about 3-4 weeks into the season, these thoughts started to become a little bit louder. And so I waited too long, I know that. But I did talk to my wife, Donna, about it. And I talked to my children, and I agreed to go get some help. And it was maybe the best move I've made in a long, long time. And so the person that's helping me, I went 10 weeks in a row, and then I stopped for 3, and he and I chatted about that. And he thought that was a good idea, actually, just to see where I was. And I was still doing really well, but I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go back again. And I'm seeing him again. I don't know if I'll be able to with my schedule in the playoffs, but he'll always be there in some capacity, because I recognize how important it is. And the thing I always say about this, sorry for going on and on and on.
No,
Don't
you're
apologize.
Okay.
It's too hard to do it alone, too painful.
Yeah.
Just if you're able to get the help, talk to somebody. You just won't believe the change. And for me, I was very fortunate, because I'm very open about what I was struggling with. The first session was very emotional, but he and I are really good. In fact, sometimes we don't even talk about mental health because it's just, I'm doing really well in that sense. So, but I'm not naive. Also to think that it's all behind me now. You know, I think I have to recognize I have to stay on top of it, and whatever challenges I may have, that there's help for me if I need it.
Yeah.
And that's so fantastic that you've been able to establish that relationship with him and have that as a resource at the ready. So whenever you're feeling like you need that support, it's going to be there for you, which is so important, right?
Yeah.
You've taken that first sort of more harder step of getting it initiated. And then once that ball is rolling, it's always going to be there for you, which is so important.
Yeah.
Right. And I suspect for people out there that might be watching, you might be nervous about maybe making that decision, and I know you'll be really nervous on the drive over.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That was unbelievable.
Which says a lot coming from you, right? Because
Yeah.
I think most people would think like, oh, you can handle anything, right? So it's important that you share that message as well, that nobody is immune to that, right? To
Not at all,
feeling
right?
anxious about the unknown. Right. Yeah.
And it can happen to anybody at any age. Like when it started to happen to me, again, I was a 58-year-old guy, right? And it kind of caught me off guard, but I kind of knew what was starting to happen.
Right.
So I had the benefit of going through it again, you know, many, many years ago, but I kind of understood what was starting to creep into my life again.
Yeah. What would you say was the hardest part of opening up about your mental health journey, Kelly?
The hardest part would have, oh boy, that's a great question. You know, I didn't have much of a problem sharing it publicly. That wasn't hard for me.
That's right.
Because I always felt like, you know, if Caitlin can do it, and she's been talking about it since 2013, and she shows incredible strength, well, then I can do that.
Yeah.
Not as well as Caitlin, but I can try. I can attempt in my own little
In your own way. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
And you're doing unbelievable.
Yeah.
Right. You're doing
I
such a
think
good job.
most difficult was just when I went in for my first session.
Yeah.
Just sharing, because it was very raw.
Yeah.
Definitely. So you were mentioning before that you were seeing somebody straight for about 10 weeks and then had a bit of a break, and then you went back to him. So what kind of signs, like how did you know that you were able to sort of take that bit of a break? Like what was for you that you were like, okay, like I feel like I can take this on now? What changed for you?
Great question. So Saturdays were becoming harder for me to go on air, and there's a reason why, and that's not really important, but and so leading up to Saturdays, I was getting more nervous than I should have, and maybe a little bit more fearful. And so that's kind of when I knew after a number of weeks that I was getting better, because that wasn't the case anymore. I was actually looking forward to Saturdays. And the other thing is what I was, you know, I've learned about this experience is that, you know, to start to enjoy it again a little bit more. So I was putting so much pressure on myself to try and, you know, be perfect, which is ridiculous. You know, when you're speaking live, you're never going to be perfect. So that's a ridiculous ask. And I was beating myself up, and, you know, I guess I was kind of good at telling people to be kind to themselves, but I wasn't myself, right?
Yes.
Which the odd thing was, because when I was going through this for the last, you know, year and a half or maybe more, you know, what was really cool, I was actually kind to myself because I knew I was going through something. So if I didn't have a broadcast that I thought I was very good, I didn't beat myself up, because I wasn't going to do that again. I knew what was going on in my head, and I didn't want to do that to myself. So that was kind of interesting. You know, that kind of dynamic, that was what was kind of leading to the problem. Then when I'm in this situation, then I was actually kind of nice to myself, which was a good thing. It's kind of hard to understand, you know, how the brain, you know, tells you these things.
Yeah, and how it plays tricks on you, right?
Yes,
That your own brain is playing tricks on you, right?
And I've learned that from Caitlin. We learned that many years ago about their irrational thoughts. and how controlling. The one thing that I loved the most is how we learned about the loop, because I had no idea about the loop, and you know, it's going round and round and round, and all, in my case, irrational thoughts.
Yep.
And you know, you understand that, you kind of understand what's going on, and that they might be irrational, but I didn't have any of the tools to stop them.
Yeah.
So I needed that. And you know, and just simple things like the person I'm working with says, you deserve this success, right? You've worked hard, you deserve it. And instead of looking at it differently, like, you know, you're not as good as you should be, and all these ridiculous things. Like when I get off the air now, and whether it's a Flames game or a Saturday night, I am just thrilled. I'm like really excited. And it hadn't been that way for a couple of years, like, because I was just so tough on myself.
Of course.
Yeah, and that's what we were going to ask, is how has your life changed since
Mhm.
getting help? What has been the biggest change for you?
Well, I just enjoy it a whole lot more.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
fantastic.
enjoy Saturday nights. You know, in fairness, that show, Hockey Night in Canada, that puts a lot of pressure on a person.
Oh my goodness.
Not like a lot of people have that chair.
Yeah.
And so when you've been doing it for a long time, that was what was kind of getting me, like, you know, how much longer can you do it? And, you know, I was looking for ridiculous things also. I wasn't looking at small, simple little plays to break down. I thought of myself as I had to be extraordinary in coming up with things during a hockey game that nobody else in the world could see, which is ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, hockey's been played for over 100 years, and the game's pretty much the same. You know,
Yeah.
it's a little bit different, and the players are better, and it's faster, but a lot of the things are the exact same. So don't try and find things that are next to impossible to find.
Right.
You know, it's interesting because it's not surprising to me that you have that mindset, given where, I mean, your career, right?
Yeah.
Like you had spent so many years trying to be perfect, always striving for this state of perfection. So it makes sense that that would just carry on in your life. I mean, you had that thought process down, right? Of this is, everything needs to be perfect. So it's not surprising to hear you say that, right?
Which is interesting though, right? Because I think I can say I'm addicted to golf, but I'm lousy. I'm lousy, but I'm okay with that. You know? Why wouldn't that happen? Why wouldn't that affect me in golf, where I'd think that I'd have to be a low handicapper? Like you know, so I think it's just something that has to do with employment as opposed to fun. So
absolutely.
Right. So I think it would have to be something revolving around that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a quote that I found from you, I think it was last year, in May of last year, that really struck a chord with us. And I wanted to bring it up and just sort of pitch it back to you and see what your thoughts are on it now. So the quote reads, "I'm really proud of my playing career, proud of my broadcasting career, but I think when it's all said and done, I'll be most proud of the work my family and others have done in the field of mental health." So I'd love to know your thoughts on that now, sort of reflecting on that and going through your mental health journey. What do you think about that quote? How does it resonate with you now?
Well, it is by far maybe the most important thing I've ever said.
Mhm.
So again, I am proud of my playing days, my broadcasting days, but when you just look at it, it's just work. That's what it is. It's just, you know, it's what I did to make a buck. But this is important stuff, because I think, you know, as you guys know, the Canadian Mental Health Association will tell Canadians that 1 in 5 suffers.
That's right.
And I agree with that to a certain degree, but I think that 1 in 5, their life is totally unmanageable.
Right.
And that's what they're getting. I think it's 4 in 5 or 5 in 5 that we all deal with something in some way. You know, it might be little, it might be something that's good for you. Maybe it's something that drives you. You know, a lot of people say that OCD is good for a lot of people. And I believe I have OCD. I've never been clinically diagnosed, but you know, how my brain kind of functions. My kids laugh at me all the time because I do certain things and I just can't stop it. And it's okay, because it doesn't affect me in a negative way from day-to-day life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that is the distinction, right?
Yeah.
Between knowing that there's maybe a concern there and maybe not, is, you know, how is it impeding on your daily functioning?
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that there's a stigma for men who seek mental health support?
Yep. and I think it's getting better. And that's why I'm actually really happy to say that, one of the things, I went public because I kind of recognize there's a stigma.
Yeah.
And some guys, for a number of years, I'm not going to say a long time, but I bet I've been telling my wife for the last 4 or 5 years, maybe a little bit less, I've been having some men in the hockey industry come to me and privately sharing with me that somebody maybe in their family or they themselves have been going through something. I've had guys tell me that their wife doesn't even know. So, that was kind of like my thing too, that, what, if they're sharing with me, there's a great need for us to get more comfortable sharing.
Yeah.
And so, and in particular, I think in the sports world, it might have that, stigma about being macho and all that kind of stuff and not showing your feelings, which, by the way, I'm happy to say I think is changing. That's a good thing too. There's a lot of work that people have done over the last number of years. I'm going to say 7 or 10 years, that is really exciting. And I don't think this is changing with the speed that a lot of us would like, but I think I am really hopeful in the next 5 or 10 years that this is going to be such a topic that nobody's ashamed of talking about. And when you need help, you will be able to go find help immediately. You won't have to wait in a queue for 3 months or 6 months, because that to me is unacceptable.
Yeah.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
And the next question was going to be about the stigma around for professional athletes to seek mental health support. And you kind of answered that as well. So what would be your advice then for somebody, or what advice are you sharing with those that are coming to you and saying, I'm really struggling, I don't know what to do? How do you kind of guide them, and what's the advice that you give them then?
Well, first of all, I ask them, how are they really doing? And, you usually get a pretty honest answer. I hesitate because that's, you don't always get the full truth, and that's okay. I always recommend getting help. I never recommend just trying to gut it out on your own, because that's an impossible way to live. It's unhealthy. I will say this, we're having a great conversation about this, but I will say, I always recommend people get help, but you don't have to share your story if you're not willing to. That's not for everybody. If you don't feel that you need to share or want to share, that's your personal choice. I am in no way, shape, or form trying to suggest to all people that, okay, now that you think you have mental health issues, you're seeing somebody, it's your duty to share. No, it's not. Not at all. If you don't feel like you can or want to, that is totally fine. My family, or a couple of us, choose to. We have somebody really close to us that has issues and they don't choose to share, and that's perfectly fine.
Absolutely. Yeah. And everybody feels differently about how they want to share that part of their story, right? So absolutely.
So we want to ask you, and I don't know how
it's a good thing I haven't cried yet either. I'm having a good day.
We have Kleenex here, but we can't, you can't pass it through the computer. So
maybe a tough question. We're wondering what your opinion is on living the life of a professional athlete and being famous. What has that been like for you? Do you is it everything that people think it is?
Boy, that's a really difficult question for me, because I guess it's the only life I've known, really. And so, first of all, I don't think that I'm famous, and I try not to be that way. I will, since you read the book, you will know one story, maybe it's my favorite, about the relationship I have with my wife, Donna. And, we got traded to LA, and Bruce McNall, loved the guy. He tried to make us a really, really popular team, and we were, because of Wayne. And so we weren't the best team in the world, but we were maybe the most popular team in the world. And so that puts a lot of stress on you. You're learning about popularity, how to deal with it. There's a bunch of other stuff going on behind the scenes, which isn't important to this story anymore. But, we were leaving the arena after a game, my wife and and I suspect I wasn't as nice as I should have been to some autograph seekers. And so we get to the car, we sit down. Before I can even put the key in the ignition, Donna says, "That's enough of that. You're going to go back to being the good guy you used to be." And so that was fantastic advice. So that kind of answers your question about how it is, for my life. I go to Tim Hortons every morning. I stand in line like everybody else. And
do you really? Wow.
100%. Yeah. Well, you guys know where I live. So there's a Tim Hortons. Before I got really, really busy with Hockey Night and Sportsnet, I used to just have one job, and that was Hockey Night. And so I had the week off usually. I had to watch hockey games, but in the morning I would always go to the Tim Hortons by my house and sit down and read 2 newspapers, and everybody knew me. So, rarely did anybody ever say anything to me because they saw me every single day. So, that's the life you lead. And, everybody where we live here in our community, they see us out and about every single day. So it means nothing really.
Yeah.
But I think I have to say this. I feel like you're the exception. Yeah. Like your general attitude is fantastic, and you're a very humble person, which I think is amazing. And, and we sort of commend you for that, because that's such a fantastic message that you're sharing, that you're a person at the end of the day. You're a human being, and just like everybody else. And that's fantastic that you take that on and you live that. Right. Yeah. So good.
Well, the one thing too, I think, I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. When you're on television, and in our case, whether it's a Flames regional or Hockey Night, the camera can spot a phony. That's what I truly believe. And so if you're kind of a fake person, you'll be exposed, because I've always said the camera doesn't lie. And so you've just got to be you, right?
Yes. Yeah.
If people like you, that's great. If they don't, that's okay too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to switch gears a tiny bit. You've mentioned Caitlin earlier, and you've talked a lot about her mental health journey in the past and other conversations and interviews that you've had. But we did want to make sure that you had a chance to make a plug for More Good Days. So do you want to share? Yes. Could you share with our listeners?
I have their website up here. It's called, you don't have to see it, but it's called moregooddaysclothing.com. And I'm glad you brought it up, because it's something that we're really proud of, Caitlin and her husband, Hayden. So they founded the company a few months ago, and More Good Days, that's their slogan, but the genesis comes from after 4 years of seeing her therapist. Caitlin came to us one day and said, "Mom, Dad, I'm starting to have more good days than bad." And what a profound statement, right?
Yeah.
And so when Hayden and Kate decided to launch this clothing company, they shortened it to More Good Days. But the whole thing is really about the garden. That's, if you go on their clothing line, there's a lot of products here that it looks like a little garden, and the flowers pop out and stuff. That was her safe place. When she was first going to see her therapist, they did breathing exercises, and that was to get to the garden. And the garden is our backyard, in fact. So that's where she and her mind needed to go. So she would lay down in the grass, and she would tell us that it's a really drab place, almost no color whatsoever. And after whether 2, 3, 4 hours of breathing, and you guys know that it can be extensive, and that's something that really bonded us together, by the way. And even if I was on the road and I had to spend 3, 4 hours breathing with her, it was good. And so, I love those kids, and the More Good Days. We're all looking for them.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah, and we really we wanted to ask you about what was it like as a father, and being on the road, and coming into town, and then going back out on the road again, and having close family member that was struggling,
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that, what that was like.
Yeah, it was really, really difficult. I think one of the things that my wife and I recognized, though, like we had to be strong. There's no question when you have a child that's going through something like this, you've got to be strong because they need the strength, right? And you're going to make them do things that they don't want to do, especially early on. And that was really, really difficult. And when she's basically begging you not to drop her off at dance, but it's the best thing for her. And it was a place that she loved for years before that. And then, she knows this now, but at the time she didn't know, we would basically pretend to drive away, but we didn't, you can't do that. So we would park in this adjacent parking lot and watch the front door of the dance studio. So, there's no opportunity for her to somehow make an excuse to the dance studio and leave. So we had our eye on the front door all the time. So you have to do really hard things like that. And it takes a lot of strength, and, nobody can do that individually. Like my wife and I shared that, and sometimes she was the strong one, sometimes I was the strong one. So you have to find ways to make sure that you're doing everything humanly possible to allow them to get better. And so it does take its toll, though, mentally, for sure, because it's hard, and it's hard on the entire family, and so you have to make sure that you're not taking on that burden on yourself, and that you're talking about it. So that's what I would also suggest to parents, that it's something that you're able to do. You're capable of it, because we were, and we didn't think we would be able to, but we certainly have been able to get through it. But it's just really, it's hard on everybody. And that's why More Good Days is so meaningful to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic that you were able to get Caitlin the support that she needed. And now you're seeking that support for yourself as well, to make sure that you're happy and healthy and in a good place. And then that'll better you too, to help her as she works her way, continues on her journey. You continue on your journey, and you can do that as a family, right?
I also love a conversation I had with Ron McLean a few years ago. It was on Bell Let's Talk, and we were texting back and forth that day. And his usual brilliant self sent me the last text of the day, and it was inner peace. What a quest. And so I think about that often, and I think about More Good Days, because I think those two sort of go hand in hand, right? We're all searching for inner peace, and it's quite a quest to find it. And we're all searching for more good days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's the work of getting to the inner peace and then holding on to it. Right.
Yeah.
And keeping it a part of your life. Right.
Yeah.
That's amazing you said that. So when I mentioned to Caitlin that I was going to go see the person that's helping with my mental health after taking 3 weeks off, she goes, "That's a good idea, Dad," because she said it's a whole lot easier to stay happy than find that place again.
Yeah.
And
Isn't that the truth?
right? It's another profound statement, and all these are all important, right? And they add up to all of us trying to feel better.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So, looking back on your life and living through the experiences of the mental health struggles, if you could give younger Kelly one piece of advice, what would it be?
I know, and I've had this conversation with the person helping me, and I've known this for a long time, and I don't know what the right balance is, but I think one of the reasons why I was able to play in NHL and have a long broadcasting career is to a certain degree because I was hard on myself, because I was striving to be pretty good at my job. But when it crosses that line, then what's healthy and what's unhealthy? And you're always sort of trying to find that line. And I don't know what the right answer is, but I can tell you a story from my playing days. Early on, I was with the Islanders, and we lost at home. I was the goalie of record, and we're getting on the bus after the game because we're busing to New Jersey. We have a game the next night, and I'm furious with myself. Like, people don't know this, but I was usually so jacked after a game if we won that I couldn't sleep till 3 or 4 in the morning. And I was so mad at myself if we lost that I couldn't sleep till 3 or 4 in the morning. And so we're getting on the bus, and I am just furious with myself, beating myself up mentally. And we had a teammate, a really good defenseman by the name of Steve Conroy on our team. And he gets on the bus and sits a couple seats in front of me and opens his travel bag and pulls out a book and starts reading. And I'm thinking, you jerk, like, why aren't you as mad as I am with this? But honestly, there was a part of my brain for the first time ever in my life, it switched on and said, I wish I was like that. That, I could have just gotten on the bus and opened my book and just, the game's in the rearview mirror. Now, if I did that, would have I been successful? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's partially how my brain kind of works. And you can't stop that part, which, to a certain degree is just who we are and kind of helps us. But I don't know, that's a tricky one. I still kind of wrestle with that to a certain degree, because, we all want to kind of be good at our job, and, you don't want to just brush away a bad performance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting when you're able to look back on your life and you look at, what has happened, and, like everything happens for a reason. Right. And you're in a certain time, in a certain space, and you react in a certain way. And if anything, it's healthy to not dwell on it and to not beat yourself up, and to understand that you reacted that way for a reason at that time. Right. And I think that goes back to the beginning that we were talking about that competitive nature, right?
Yeah.
And having to, go into a certain headspace so that you can excel, right?
You know why I'm smiling? Because it just occurred to me. I had a recent Flames game, and at the end of the night, Rick and I had to do a hit for Sportsnet Central. So we stay a little bit longer, you sign off on the game, and then you sit there, and then you record this thing that goes into the sports highlight show, right? So recently I was terrible in that hit. Like I consider myself a pro in that I can do those just, like that.
Yeah.
And I was terrible. And you know what? It brought a smile to my face because I laughed about it after, and I didn't carry it home with me. In fact, I got my after and called my wife, and I said, oh my gosh, was I horrible in that hit? But I was laughing. I was like, yeah, that's how it just goes.
Yeah.
I didn't ask to do it again. I didn't ask the producer, let's tape this again. I was just good. I was just thought, you know what? This is healthy for you. Just have a really rotten performance and live with it and be okay.
And again, that's another signal of the work and the progress that you've made, right? And
right.
How you're advancing, right? So
exactly.
Good
now
on
the viewer back home was probably going, how in the world does this guy still have a job? I could do that. I could ramble on and make no sense whatsoever, but how it goes.
No, and I think it's a much smaller scale for us compared to what you do for a living, but we often think that too, as being podcast hosts, is we're always like, thinking and analyzing, did we hit the mark? Did we get the information that people wanted to hear? Right. And you can't help but think back on it, but it's, how far do you carry it with you? Right. Is really important.
And I think the other part too, and we, in our conversation is going back to this idea of we're all human beings at the end of the day, right? We have limitations. We have our own limits where we just, you hit it and you're like, hey, that's it. I've been perfect all this time. And now I'm going to not be perfect for just a little bit. Right?
Yeah, that's right. And, maybe one of the things too, that's helpful for me in terms of broadcasting is that I'm so busy that I probably don't have enough time to look back and look at a previous broadcast. Like when I used to work just at Hockey Night for a lot of years, since we're only working basically Saturdays, we would do like a full-on debrief, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, whatever day it would happen to be. And we'd run through the previous show. Like we'd pick apart every single segment. Like, hey, this was good. This was good. This was not very good. We can't be this bad again. And this thing. So you're always like finding negative stuff. Right. Yeah. And so with now doing these two jobs, Flames and Hockey Night, I just don't have time to look back. Now, I will say this often, and with the help that I'm getting, and I like to do this now, I like to watch almost all my broadcasts now and just sit down, have a glass of wine and watch it and really kind of enjoy it again. Like, yeah, that was good. Yeah, that was good. I like that part. And sort of, give myself a pat on the back on occasion. And I totally got away from that for sure for about 5 or so years, maybe more.
Wow.
That's
Well,
incredible.
good on you, Kelly.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
That's unbelievable. So huge kudos to you.
So
Now, nobody likes watching themselves or listening to themselves.
No,
we
We all
agree.
think, yeah, right.
It's
We all think
awful.
it's a better sounding voice. And then when you hear it, you're like, oh man, I hate my voice.
We agree with you, Kelly.
100%. We can attest to that for sure. Just before we close out, do you want to leave us with any sort of last little pearls of wisdom that you want
Yeah.
to share with our listeners and with your fans?
I don't know if this is pearls of wisdom, but I'm just so excited that we were having these conversations.
Mhm.
And you know, I think just keeping it real, and like, you know, you saw me get a little weepy there, and you know, it's very emotional and it's real and it's just real life. And instead of hiding it or, you know, not talking about it, this is just great work that you guys are doing. And I'm so honored that you invited me on. And this is, I think this is important work because everybody's going through something, right? So it's, you know, you're not only talking to just a few select people, you're talking to everybody. This is amazing. And can you imagine how great this is going to be in 5 years or 10 years? You guys are going to be rock stars. You're going to have the biggest podcast ever. And they're going to say, everybody's going to want to be on your show and share their own journey with mental health. And it's going to be, it's really special. Just so happy we're having these conversations.
Thank you, Kelly.
You're the best.
Yeah.
Seriously. Like, honestly, thank you. We really hope that's what our future holds.
Yeah.
And because we do, I mean, we genuinely have a passion to break the stigma about
Yeah.
this conversation. So
Right.
with your help and support, it's just fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you.
And now I had to say all those nice things because you guys were nice enough to drop off this drink can with all the things to make it easier. So I'm just kidding about that. You guys are great, but I really appreciate that. That's the nicest thing. In fact, we're going to have, you know, the food trays that you dropped off. We're having that for dinner tonight.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Good. That makes us happy. Thank you.
That's excellent.
What an experience.
That was incredible.
Oh my goodness.
Fantastic insight from Kelly.
Yeah. And it was so wonderful to see that he was able to be vulnerable and to really give us good insight into what he's gone through, how it's affected him and his family. And also just the realness, like we always talk about, is that he's a human being just like us.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
So grateful. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you. We're so grateful that you're able to take this time to share your story with us. And we are hoping that many hear it far and wide. So as always, we will close with a quote. And this one comes from Kelly himself. He actually said it in this episode. We are all searching for more good days.